Awesome. Yeah. The world is constructed via white hyperreality that relies on the exchange and fungibility of black existence and death. Signs and symbols like the trope of the black dog or framing black individuals as wild gets misappropriated to justify the extermination of black life philosophy. In 17, black life lives inside of the constituted white fixed reason consistent subsidy was another reality conscious unable to distinguish between the fiction curated by white real being and the real realities of black death. More of any liberal justice seems to structure the relationship between the mythical and the real. The black does not have a grammar to speak against, whereas trapped in since blackness only articulate itself through whiteness. The semiotics of whiteness, there's no outside to whiteness. And wilderness is a settler colonial fantasy that paints the land as empty, pure, and untouched by human relation. The only way to create a wild landscape is to first disappear the people living on it. Fletcher and Edo on 21. Wilderness prioritize Western notions of reason and narrow solution to environments of Christ, bringing order and rationality to sound civilize peoples of nature. A little regard for indigenous ways of knowing notions of wilderness, imperial, cost high value spaces as pristine and people free and aid of preservation efforts to redefine through objective scientific measures distance white wilderness forever practice in society, even the governance and agency of indigenous and local peoples. Conservation movements build a house of cards that justifies exclusion in the guise of managing a wilderness for in-house leisure to degrade the ecological quality and resilience of those along people landscapes. And the fantasy of wilderness is not about nature but controlled attempts to rewild or a form of conservation policy that marks individual life as disorder to ultimately justify removal. The idea that nature is only meaningful as a thing to save is a fundamentally human-centric worldview that waves the flag of democratic empowerment, but only for a single species. Before you shake your water bottle, ask me if it's real. I just want you to know I can't believe it's not nature either. While in 22, nature has been subsumed under the political economy. Nature's reformatting becomes a sign of value, and nature no longer constitutes a cosmological reference, but is a reconceptualized the past material of human labor. Nature has rediscovered and liberated. Discovery resided significance of human interest in society. Nature collapses the fourth phase of the symbolical, and nature becomes disappeared under meaningful for us. Nature continues to exist for reimagining of culture. Nature reflected in the engineering of the planet for the benefit of the minority. Disappearance and anthropologic value fulminates a simulation and relation of technology control and exploitation occurs by redefining production and naturalization. ESD assumes transforming conditions might be reversed by revisioning schools as a transformation ecologies. ESD resumes climate change that can be averted through education, cognitive labor, programs, Celios of social normativity, the salvation of the human-centered world, consideration of environmental issues are routed through economic advantages. Democratic empowerment sought by multiple sexes undercut as it pertains to a single species of presupposition that change may be catalyzed through productive capacity draws from the logic of exploitation. Nature becomes a past material from labor expressed value issue pertains to harmonization in which human and environmental needs are equilibrated, balancing economic progress. Health fails to recognize affordances we have already exceeded, cut the card that exceeded, and this is true of debate. Critical arguments are treated as wild, excessive, and chaotic and dangerous. Debate renders difference as deviance and uses that to explain why we don't belong. The after becomes a trespasser and the K becomes the invasive. The refusal to simulate policy becomes a threat to the event. What wilderness does to the land, debate does to us. This pattern of violence is evident. If activators have had the cops called on them at tournaments like Harvard just for playing music or being too loud, policy judges continuously say that K debate is cheating and not real. Coaches ask teams to be more professional and say that K's kill the point of the activity. Field debaters frame K's as not technical enough or not good at responding to arguments. These symbols are placed onto K teams the same way that whiteness puts symbols of deviance and disgust onto blackness to justify their extermination. K debaters are read as wild, denied access to the ballot because we could simply read it and lose, and denied speaks all because our method refuses to perform the rationality of whiteness framework, redraws the terrain of what counts as arguments, forcing K debaters to inhabit a zone built for white comfort. Framework is rewilding. It forces us into a terrain of good white folk policy argumentation. This is epistemic landscaping. Read Blinky in 25. Rise of black insurgent argumentation and the counterinsurgent reactions reveal the ways in which hegemonic engagement, proud alternative models, debates, protocols reinforce an inordinate vision of argumentation, of manifestation of racial logics that figures black insurgent arguments as existential because insurgent argument does not accede to given terms. Practitioners must be lazy. The paradigm of course is a racial contract through the reiteration that makes the appearance of the natural. The rest is presumed to require a plan. Any act that refuses to violating and rejected plan debate treats the resolution like a contract. This brackets out performative nature of law. The assumption of sociological positives not only secure states, it operates like a laying down of a civilizational imperative must be normalized as law, even though there are no rules that beyond takes on a policing function. SSD, TPA's justified assimilation is demand hybrid privileging of technocratic definitions for alternative interpretations, racial liberal frameworks, or practice of lawmaking and law enforcement, delimit means discipline. There's no language in any which instructs participants on how to approach the res of fiat is imagined as an ordinary repetitive nature of instrumentalization forms a core arsenal logic of containment marks that as a jurisdictional argument and forcing blackness to conform to white terms bad. Their demands to cohere black suffering to a broader scheme of militarization and extinction via the production of simulated images of violence is nothing but illustrate the carelessness of empathy that locks anti-blackness into the symbolic novel in Comment 14. In wake of these healing Michael Brown social media littered with images of terror, tanks and police and military are all aimed at black people. Police forces were able to find new equipment and technologies thanks to the funding of a new belief house safety attacks to the severe engendered by the domestic urban rebellions led by black people. Random license for police to turn the marginalized population interested in the American war on terror as a combo has been here past militarization and plot to access against the U.S. Rally attention is drawn to a spectacular event rather than mundane and cut the card at mundane. Vote out to endorse the spirit of symbolic terrorism. Our refusal of the resolution is a form of guerrilla linguistics that interrogates the structure of racism. Gillespie 17. A form of the resistance needed a form of guerrilla linguistics when no alternative form of thinking is allowed, no other way I wish there is but terroristic situational transferability to rupture the system of semiotics or an equally confounding system of semiotic total disorders unleashed. We only have a power to end the world through that the U.S. has an international military force, nuclear arms, and police state to terrorize the world. Terrorism disavows any need to focus on social life, steals away the condition of being responsibility. In its uniquely key and educational institution, unlearning imperialism requires judges to commit to interrogating from within. As Evelyn 24, unlearning imperialism requires an educator to commit constantly to interrogate manifestations pursued only if more to know forms of emotional imperialism acknowledges the exercise of violence against minority peoples, transforming the second trauma racialization of theoretical approach here. That's any universal appeals question of what made structures that made being here something that happens to all of us, realization of social political life. Any resistance to these affective attachments with a pedagogy of unlearning even minor when it opens to alternatives for practice is good. Jones and 16. Marginalized community member reframe position by calling out target chips from immoralized aviators, the one who takes control via confrontation to instead of seeking permission to interject a piece of rigorous consent speaking formally established voice authorized audience bears essential function, now merely passive listener ratified addressees. Okay, I cut that card at addressees. However you say that. I'm good for those.
Good. Is anyone not ready?
Wait, which card did he end on?
The last card I just didn't read past ratified addressees or whatever.
Would you concede the round to have a discussion about your own?
No.
Why?
Because I believe that the ballot is a necessity in order to spread our literature, to explain why K-debate is good, and the logic that we need to concede around to explain our literature is bad.
Okay, so the first two things you mentioned, spread your literature and have a discussion about it. Why can't you do this in another forum, and why can't a discussion right now in front of all these people solve? We would say the logic that we are framed as deviant or needed to leave the activity is what the 1AC critiques. When have we said that you're deviant?
Well, you just asked me to leave the activity, which would mean that I'm a deviant to what the activity should normally do.
I'm asking.
Well,
if
I'll ask you a question about your question. Why are you asking me these questions?
You can't ask me questions during my CS. Why is getting the ballot in this demo debate at camp key to your movement to spread your literature?
There's a lot of arguments. I'd say the one that we can pin to the most is the Zembalus evidence. It says that in educational institutions, moments of teaching where we can unlearn imperialism and explain why imperialism is bad by acknowledging every form of emotional imperialism that exists in debate or the topic as a form of violence is good.
Even if you hear about these moments of imperialism, why does that mean that we interrogate our own behavior and change ourselves for the future?
Well, the evidence says that the more that you contest theoretical approaches that are universalist, the more that we question our role in the activity, and the more that educators.
This just seems to be an assertion. The more that we come into contact, learning about imperialism, the more we want to change ourselves. Why would it cause every single person to change their?
Well, the argument isn't that we have to win that every single person changes themselves. We just need to win that there's a role for the affirmative inside of the debate space, and that the questions that we're critiquing should not exist in the future. So. Teams should stop reading Topicality, framing teams as deviant while doing so, calling us cheaters, telling us we need to
Debate is a voluntary activity. The resolution that the U.S. ought to rewild substantial tracts of land, this was negotiated and announced in advance. So why are you here debating this topic if you think it's bad?
Why do you think I don't deserve to be here?
Well, I'm asking you, why are you debating this in a space that
because I think that there are questions that are bigger than the resolution, like what debate should look like, and I think that debates about debate are good. There are many examples of people using metaphors of the resolution.
What constitutes as a debate about debate?
Debates over whether we should, like a concept that debate is critiquing. Obviously, I've critiqued the idea of wilderness that the resolution entails, and we've critiqued that the way that certain arguments are framed in debate treat black debaters as deviant or wild. Our Reed-Brinkley evidence has multiple examples of this.
The Reed-Brinkley evidence, why? Actually, that's
Okay. Cross-X. How do you guys think about that? What do you guys think about that? Do you have any idea about any questions you thought that Ava asked that were particularly good?
Did you concede the round?
Yeah, the first question.
Yeah, would you concede the round to have a discussion of your app? Why do you think Ava asked this question?
To like
Competitive incentive.
Okay, ballot pick, competitive incentives, anything else? Yeah, she wants to understand what Spencer's responses are going to be to why she wants the ballot. That was also kind of the next series of questions in debate. Were there any other questions in cross-ex that were related to the ballot or why Spencer might want the ballot? Or what was Spencer's answer to this question, and do you guys think it was persuasive?
No.
That like
You
wait,
don't
sorry.
think it was persuasive?
What do you think can you repeat the question?
What were Spencer's answers to this question, and do you think they were persuasive?
Yeah, I think they were persuasive. He was like answering it from the perspective that like trying to get me to concede the round right now and talk about it. It's like a form of trying to push me out of debate.
Yeah, so Spencer used the language of his affirmative to kind of push back against the questions in cross-ex, something that a lot of K debaters will do, saying that he is kind of being labeled as deviant within cross-ex kind of demonstrates and is going to be something that later in the debate he might use to justify or prove his framework. Alright, you're good.
Okay. Oh, sorry, let me sum it up. Okay, I sent the ones.
Actually,
Yeah.
I need to plug my computer.
How many off? It's one off and then case. First on framing and then the method.
Wait, how bad do you need your computer to be first? That's not good. Thank you.
Okay. That's fine. Okay, so anyone not ready? The negative word on untopical affirmative to clarify they can read the one I see, but your forfeit the ballot result requires a legislative instrument, as if a legislative instrument used for making declarations and policies, uses the term result and uses only federal. I could attend taking organizing the US mutation between federal government dictionary are considered with this, given interim only the Fed and we well concerns habitatsdictionary.com and injuries animals or points of racial habitat or habitats similar to the natural one and tracts of lands are legal units keyword entity tract of land refers to which piece of land item as a distinct unit for legal administrative or surveying purposes. 2 impacts 1 is fairness. They destroyed by shifting the stasis of debates and normalized prep and avoid controversy that waste strategy proceeds pedagogy going through dropped arguments. Having judges who agree with you and expecting their arguments to be fairly evaluated proofs, but if competition doesn't matter to them, just vote negative here too. A splash, unvetted topics, evaluate the benefits of detailed prep and research. Topical stasis produces in-depth strategies that are empirical to debates, pedagogical value, and playing. It turns case through debating well prepared opponent trains. Effective accuracy skills, but failure to iterate produces false positive, which is negative perception. Reading parts of it on the next calls and invites more discussion. Since understanding the intricacies of both sides is a progressive to strengthening the side of truth, the parts of critique. Rewilding or the state can be read against plans, and the parts that defend weak points can be an app reading and losing. Also solves negative discussions every round, and the opponent is open to listening. Instead of contestation value warrants for competitive incentives, drug pedagogy by KVK debates for bad forces, shall pathologize in case studies for the Wednesday, either tell us from the play debate by the Academy K that their organizing was bad and wrong by the CAPK, etc. Only reading a plan allows us to negate mechanisms instead of methods into tied to social location, and if access matters, be sure to turn it procedural fairness is demonstrated to have a causal relationship to increase academic engagement, knowledge retention, and intellectual community inverse is correlated with increases in cynicism, exhaustion, and burnout will cause you to reach experience of procedural fairness, possibly correlated with academic accuracy, definition, absorption, and the correlated exhaustion and cynicism to giving how dimensions control for demographics, visual and group identification, procedure fairness, remain significant and positively predicted academic engagement, negatively predicted academic burden more likely to accept their decisions affecting them, indirect effect of the experience of procedural justice is positive and significant predictor of academic burnout. No RBS litigating accusations of team being violent is bad, limited speech terms create false positives in competition, encourages doubling down and gaslighting, which turns their impacts ending the round and letting the judges side solves voting is down for dropping an argument won't convince us that we're racist, but losing absent the flow signals we were actually problematic, which deters us in the future. Now case. Great. The role that is to vote for the better to bear anything else is arbitrary, which is unfair, and any link term means we outweigh under their framing, reject any role of balance one, reject their role of balance one. It's incoherent. What happens when people when two black debaters hit each other when they want different topics or disagree, the role of that can be universalized. That's reason to reject it. Since a person accomplice cannot be considered to your ballot too. It's more racist, unconditionally deferring to black debaters and candidates. Authenticity testing that'll be below. It means that people win simply based on their identity, division, their success, and could have accomplished this negative presumption. 1, it's valid, it's unnecessary. The WC has already been read and the reports are available online. But competition trends that losses are internalized as technical and not ethical mistakes. So debaters are structurally incentivized to double down on problematic arguments. At best, people can modify the act literature and deploy for competitive game, which is trivializing and violent. 2, no subject information. Make them answer each argument. A, it's all causes family school. The next 50 years away. B, it's which side we debate against arguments you've read, i.e. case. Disproving any cognitive attachment to them. Different K teams export different models of debate, which means that they have to not export any one of their own because conflicts with others. C is lying. Teams breed verifiably incorrect arguments like warming good, knowing that they are scientifically disproven. D, other rounds them. Each K team offers a different vision of the topics, and judges watch hundreds of rounds a year to external data sets. To believing that ballots matter. A is illustration. Voting for this app in debate gives white judges a warm, pleasant feeling, when in reality, when in reality it creates an alibi for ignorance outside debate, which turns Philip B. is cruel opposite during a performance. And single round tools and unfunded hope the debate can help debaters change the world reality. All that changes is a result of taboo, which is psychologically violent. Now their cards read quickly is wrong to use is a negotiation on imposition. We have discussions about a common norm or interval also saws. You can read the same app and critique you can read the same app and critique the topic. We just shouldn't be burned with rejoinder, not be responsible for based on a lot of debate, enforcing competition within competitive spaces. We have to learn advocacy skills as the skills to for each of the real world is good. They say read it and lose his values access. This requires them to learn knowledge, which will answer below, but other forms like book clubs, etc. Also solve their discussions, but cross-apply our interest above because they can still critique the res and have all their options. We just shouldn't have to negate it, symbolize as wrong. They're warned that people will change behavior because they hear about imperialism is a claim with no warrant. The ballot is solely a referendum of technicality. Because debate inherently is a competition that forces you to switch sides. For example, the next one, Spencer could negate this act, but no subject formation, which was answered above. Now the method, fiat is good at positions, debaters, and judges. As budding social critics without a position debate as anything more than the game of game. 97 debaters should understand this analysis, social critics, and social practical politics will feel hold a policy-making position. All globally criticism, debate, universal criticism, debate is a game of criticism, it's not restricted to official criticism. Is a prerequisite to policy, specified age makes important. The possibility and one need not influence or agenda to discuss the U.S. should do underwritten. Judges are removed from deliberation, inherently to maintain utopian attitudes are structured, incremental and radical distinction makes no difference. Debate for decades, debaters use fiat or strategy to propose radical changes. Students right talking about policies, not making policy, and black students should debate the hypothetical consequences of foreign policy change concerned with nuclear change. This is often struck for a global perspective most multiple world people's prevention of nuclear annihilation is the most important issue for Asia. Black studies for prevention towards anti-nuclear activities or should be made. The goal of the students is regardless of reason for supporting reduction in inclusive policy would be an important aspect of black education needs. A continuous expansion of black students who face these issues. So, what would you do if role-playing ought to be reaching even greater requests as U.S. policy? Changing the foreign policy and should be master reviewing profit. Violence will be painful. The role of black studies not to propose ideologies but expand consciousness and present action, not to force options, but to make all clear with better understanding of things to discover between maintaining striving and cooperative clear constant interaction among conservative and reactionaries and collegiate. There's motives that black studies should prepare for that decision-making process. I'm good for cross.
Okay, let me just get. Okay. If chaos are unpredictable, why did I decide to read one?
If chaos are, well, I mean, I don't know why you decided to read one. You could have defended the topic.
Okay.
It's the most predictable thing according to the legal definitions that we've read.
Wait, why are legal definitions predictable?
Yeah, these are the most easily accessible thing online. So, like, even if other people might have different interpretations of.
Actually, I have a better question. Did I read every possible app that could have been read, or one?
That doesn't matter because what your model justifies is valid.
So models are important. On
Well,
ballot solvency, you say that debate shouldn't be about models, but should be about specifically what has occurred in this round and whether we could solve it. Why is that not the case if your entire interpretation relies on the fact that there's an infinite litany of things I could have done, but I haven't done those clearly?
If there's an infinite, well, we've said that in this round you cannot solve your offense, but also the model that you created.
So why do you get offense to your model as a T team, but K teams don't get offense to what their model is?
Well, I mean, we can obviously win that.
That seems racist, no?
KBK debates are bad.
Well, my model doesn't have to be KBK
No, you
debates.
can. Well, you
could read a version of Topicality.
You can read the app that you have read, but we shouldn't be burdened with rejoinder.
I understand, but the reason for why you shouldn't be burdened with rejoinder is because in this round we can't solve our impacts, but then you get access to model arguments about an infinite litany of impact or literature bases that I could have read, no? How is that fair?
We've made an argument that, one, it destroys fairness in every single round because Like,
Okay, so we do care about future rounds when we're creating a decision about the model of need not be burdened with rejoinder, correct?
Well, we should not be required to negate this app because if you prove that.
Right,
there's
and this
no
would apply to
predictable
all
app, then it's
non-topical
trash.
apps, right?
Well, we've read a predictable interpretation of the topic, and if it does not meet our
So
interpretation,
all
then we
apps
should
that
not be
don't
burdened
meet the
with rejoinder.
interpretation, correct?
We're talking.
Well, I'm just trying to get you to say that models are important, because obviously your
about the
offense
app and
relies
the
on
app.
models, right?
We've read an argument that the app that you have read is bad for fairness in class.
And the reason why is,
Limits and ground.
and that means that
That-
there's an infinite
that we
number
do
of
not
things I
need-
could
that
have
we-
read, correct? That are
That your
unbreakable.
model justifies.
Yeah, so models are important. Can you just say yes?
We're saying that the app that you have read in this debate is bad because it explodes limits and destroys negative ground.
Okay, how does the ballot resolve unfairness?
Sure. Well, first, it can't resolve your offense because the
Well, how does it
racism
resolve
from
yours?
Kia's
I
already been
understand
read.
why you say it doesn't resolve mine.
Because when we do not have access to the ballot because of the reasons for because of the internal links for limits and ground, the reason why so voting us up means that we get our access to the ballot, which has been restricted because of
Okay.
the app that you have read.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay. One and C in cross-ex. Same question, cross-ex. Do you think there are any good questions that Spencer asked Ava, or do you think a good one was? Yes. Models are good, or rather that she is defending a form of models debate. Spencer may not be saying that models are good. He might, but he was kind of trying to pin down Ava's perspective, and that was something that was very obvious and prevalent. He was trying to get her to say something very clear, and that line of questioning that he asked her was something that was getting her progressively closer to that point. And do you guys think he was successful at doing that? Justin, you're nodding. Why?
Just
Like, she couldn't really answer. Like, it was the same, she repeated the same.
Yeah. So the answer got kind of repetitive. She didn't really want to answer the question, but it seems as though it pointed in that direction. Joseph?
yeah, like I agree with that. Like
You agree with
it
that?
sounded like kind of she was trying to like duck the question and like not like give him a link.
Yeah. Definitely. What about that last question where Spencer asks, how does the ballot solve unfairness? Why do you think he would ask this? Yeah.
It says of the fact that, like, to rectify it, it would set a no on easy grounds.
Yeah, well, maybe that's the answer, but why would Spencer want to ask this question though? Why would he want to know what the answer that Ava's going to say is?
So you can answer in his next speech.
Yeah, well, because if Ava's asking him why he gets the ballot, he's going to make offensive arguments that she shouldn't get the ballot for reading fairness, or that the ballot can't solve her offense either. So that it's not just a one-way argument, and that he's not just on the other side playing defense. Alright, are you guys going to start with one ear now? Or?
Oh, yeah, I'm
Well, are you
good.
gonna talk about the one-year strategy before we?
Yeah, I can talk about it a little bit. So a lot of the one hour will probably just be like trying to get through everything. I think like the hardest version, or the reason why the 1 hour is a hard time against T, especially this version, is like obviously Ava made a ton of arguments for a ton of things. So a lot of what the 1 AR is going to try to do is generate like offense. So I have a lot of routes for the 2 AR, and then also generate arguments that outframe what the 1 NC says, if that makes sense. I'm gonna send 2 cards. Just the app and then T.
Is my phone over there? Aditya? Is that phone on your table? Somewhere? Hey. Aditya, is my phone on your table?
is everyone good? Okay, I'm just gonna assume that that's yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The affirmative is a topic by critiquing the fantasy of wilderness, not just as an environmental myth, but also a disciplinary structure that marks land embodies as wild, deviant, and disposable wilderness as a settler colonial invention that requires conditions for erasure to exist pristine. Land is made through violence. Debate does the same. It casts non-traditional arguments, wild disruption, justifying the exclusion in the name and order of fairness. Fairness, our method rejects that logic. We reclaim debate space by making sure that erasure is visible, that balance of movement or refusal, and ethical stance against a fantasy that assures that there's never such a thing as untouched land or mutual debate. I'll do the live out of the roll of ballot hijack. I'll win the flow. So I'll prove that I'm the better debater. I didn't make any other roll of ballot, so it wouldn't violate this. The presumption argument on the one argument online isn't enough. For winning rounds is unique value, which was balance solvency above, or which is the balance solvency that I'll do in a second. And on double down one turn, if we are completely incentivized, repetitively voting them down on T tells me to go for another option, ships it out of the meta, which solves all of our dissents that will make it a second linearly to victim blaming. The threat alone is a racist voting issue. Blackmailing us by saying that they'd be more racist if we tried beating them makes it inaccessible. It scares teams away from calling out racism and fear retribution, independently choosing not to double down and solve. No one forces them to. Yes, subjectivity, the unconscious outweighs change 17. Interpersonal conversation, reducing stereotype, negative step by accident, prolonged rumination, behavior, motivation to stereotype, 7 days later allows an external source of error, create awareness, self-reflection, until we give a bias line, solid confrontations, external identifier during motivation to be egalitarian. The ballot is key. One norm setting LD years ago did not have disclosure of case, but they became normalized due to competitive success. That limit now just your ballot as a drop on the ballot when they can't explain why there's an ocean in front of you. 2 golden rules. Consequently, better to assume that the ballot solves voting for us, and accidentally realizing the ballot can't solve has no impact on voting for us with the potential. The ballot solving prevents infinite racism. 3 constitutivism. Judges or educators must bar discriminatory language. Always approximate predictability. Each have room and no date. Paradigms are your educational audience. Discriminatory language forbidden. We mature educators. The last reliable line. We don't need to answer subjectivity shift arguments because our arguments about unconscious, which means that it assumes arguments that are far more vast than debate because you have no reason why debate is uniquely key. The external this has guilt dissuasion turn denying our agency. You're denying our agency because the judge is white is violent and obviously just untrue because there are non-white individuals in this room. The cool optimism argument winning any ballot solvency argument obviously outframes this because there's just a reason why if the ballot didn't solve it would be bad to assume that it did, but we have a reason for why the ballot does solve, which is above. Fiat is good. Fiat being good isn't intrinsic to your intern. Even if fiat is a concept is good, the application of it can be bad, which will be all of the impact turns that the Drake evidence makes no sense because this topic does not enforce you to read a nuclear war act. That's T debate. I mean T, we metaphorically enact the resolution by rewilding debate, which is an example of rewilding a tract of land because the U.S. is a tract of land and people in debate are all on lands, i.e. debate tournaments exist on lands. Counterinterpretation, the affidavit dependent on topical advocacy and the negative must rejoin. Cross-ex concedes that this debate is about models, while straight turns there is absent attaching the burden of rejoinder to the ballot. The negative wins before the one is read, which means that chaos loses upon introduction, which makes debates over them impossible, which means they bracket out all over literature. Topicality is violent. One, T praise key debaters as deviant or wild, which is the logic used to exterminate black individuals, winning the opposite dissent. To T2, debates about fake are good. The only way to address intercommunal grievances proven by Louisville, normalizing K debate, and anything else leads debate in a perpetual state of racism, which outweighs 3 fiat is violent and forces us into spectator mentality, where we actualize fake arguments and force us to defend the state, which assimilates us into racist structure debate for grammar imposing universal static definitions. The resolution denies our agency to interpret the resolution as we like, which is specific to wilderness, which they've dropped out of the 1AC evidence. Racism outweighs 1 materiality. Fairness is intangible, but racism is literally felt. 1AC lacks a word for why you should prioritize procedure over physical safety. 2, inaccessibility is the ultimate unfair abuse. It makes the round and engagement literally impossible. No paradox. It's not unique. There's race and paradox. Both debaters rely on anti-racist evaluation, otherwise you can hack against someone on the basis of their color of the skin. No glow pesky can see that distributive fairness leads to exhaustion and racism is procedurally unfair, which was done above. The competitive incentives argument enforcement is sad drop them for insisting that fairness comes prior to everything else. Assumes that the 1AC was read with the intention of suing argumentation, which frames key debaters as violent, as bad faith or disingenuous for cheating. Limits is wrong. The suicide debate argument proves that they should be prepared to debate the app when it's read on the next. So no reason you couldn't just read app arguments negating against an app that doesn't defend the topic. And cross-ex concedes that their offense relies on models in this round. So if they say in round abuse, then they don't have offense. Clash is wrong, racist clash is bad. So any impact turn I win answers to the TV. Suicide debate is wrong. Force us to be racist 50% of the time. Seek around is wrong. Agency. Debaters should confront their aggressors on their own terms, which was dropped out of the Jones evidence. 2, reverse tab solves. If you're so uncomfortable that I want the round technically litigated, then you should stake it on yourself.
Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts before I get started on explaining that 1AR?
I have a question.
Yes, Sure.
What was his arguments for why models matter?
For why models matter? So there are
The argument I made for why models matter was examples of how models have changed debates. So how LD didn't have disclosure or Ks before, but they have been normalized due to competitive success. which means that absent them being able to explain an alternative example for why models don't work, you should just assume that the ballot can set a norm.
Yeah. Okay, so what are some important arguments you think the 1AR makes, or do you think there are any issues with the 1AR based on the 1 and C? Anything you think they might have misanswered, conceded, or maybe something they did particularly well? Anyone? Okay. So the 1AR on the case page starts off with establishing its solvency. So things like ballot solvency that is questioned and relevant for every other flow is going to be a staple of this debate. So he makes 3 arguments. The first one is something that Chupang just explained. Does anyone know what the second argument was, or why the ballot does solve his impacts? The hand?
Wait, what's the constitutivism thing?
That was the third one.
Oh.
Golden rule. Yeah. All right. Someone explain that argument.
I didn't see golden rule.
Chupang?
I think it's just we should try pretending, like even if it doesn't solve, we should try pretending that it solves.
Why?
Because there's a greater impact?
Even if it has 1% chance of triggering things like racism and
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, exactly. All right. What about the constitutive? Or the argument is that if it is true that the ballot does solve, then it is something that, or even if there's a 1% risk that the ballot does solve, then we should assume that it does, because the alternative is that we allow racism to go unchecked without doing anything about it. The third argument that Aditya already mentioned, it was constitutivism. Does anyone understand that argument or want to explain it?
Page check.
Yeah.
It's intrinsic to the activity and to the roles of judge to be educators.
Yeah, and the evidence is from tab room, so literally the place where your ballot gets put into the round. So it's pretty credible. The case page, the 1AR makes a lot of creative arguments here. Not only the normal impact turns that we talked about, but there's also an I meet on the top of the theory shelf. Does anyone understand this one?
They theoretically meet because they rewild the resolution or something, or
No, almost.
I forgot what they
All right.
rewild.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes.
They claim that debate is like a substantial tract of land made
Yeah.
up by people like in the US.
Yeah, so they claim that the debaters, the audience, the judges are all the people that they're rewilding in the present moment right now. So this room is something that is currently being rewilded by the reading of the 1AC. So yeah. Are there any other arguments that you guys don't understand or think you missed on your flow? Any questions that you might have about the 1AR?
What was the answer to like the Glauchowski evidence? I don't know how you pronounce that.
Yeah, so there were 2 arguments. The first was it concedes that unfairness or distributing fairness leads to exhaustion. And the second one is that racism is procedurally unfair. So that was a big part of the 1AR as well, is that they're going for their framework and their impact of racism is the worst kind of unfairness. It is something that is, it was implicated to answer a lot of the fairness arguments. So the fairness paradox was answered with the racism paradox. It was said that it outweighs because it is a why, or what, I guess, what are 2 of the reasons why racism outweighs fairness? Yes?
Explain the double down.
Yeah, I'll talk about that as soon as someone answers this one.
Racism has like material impacts.
Yeah, it has material impact, so we can actually feel racism. Yeah, okay, so we'll go to the case page and talk about the double down argument. So double down, do you understand what the argument was in the 1 and C? So the response in the 1AR was that if debaters just double down, that it justifies victim blaming, because it says that just because you are problematic and someone in response to that getting called out for being problematic means that they kind of become more, obviously they continue to do the things that were bad in the first place. It justifies victim blaming because obviously if you do something bad against somebody else and then you take that as something that permits you to continue doing that bad thing, it is obviously immoral and justifies something like, it doesn't solve the problem, right? And yeah. Yeah. Based on the 1AR, do you guys have any predictions for what the 2NR might go for? Or what do you think, if you had to give the 2NR, would you go for? In regards to either going for fairness or clash? Yeah?
I think probably Clash, because fairness was pretty well responded to.
Probably clash, okay, because fairness was responded to. Okay. What kind of clash? So how would the tuner explain clash? Or I guess what do you think the 1 year's primary response to clash was? Yeah?
Was it like the clash is racist 50% of the time or something?
Yeah, it's like saying, well, clash doesn't matter if we can't have a good stasis point for the debate, which exists under topical models because it is from a racist starting point. So clash under a topical affirmative does not matter, especially if the affirmative is winning its thesis claim. So a large part of the 1AC goes conceded. So it is going to be difficult for the tuner to make arguments about why their thesis claim about how the world is structured is false, because it was not a very large part of the 1C. So does anyone have any idea or can have any reasons why the tuner might go for fairness?
Interacts with the arguments.
It what?
Interacts with the arguments.
Yeah, it interacts really well with the arguments that Spencer put a lot of time on. It is a core controversy in the debate that clashes directly with what Spencer says. So the arguments about racism versus fairness were introduced very recently in the 1AR. So we're opposed as the 1AC was largely unanswered in the 1NC. Fairness is something that the 2NR can go for because the responses in the 1AR were very new. Or obviously they were new because they had to respond then. But yeah, so they're, are you gonna take more prep or are you good?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'll send it.
Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Wait, Harris.
Yeah.
So like, if Spencer says that like T is racist and that the 1NC like shouldn't go for it, like what would he say like the 1NC like should do instead and still be able to like debate and engage?
Well, I think not read Topicality. So there's like probably a lot of critical literature the negative could read that would probably engage with the affirmative and might probably prompt a really educational debate, and the affirmative might advocate for that. So say for example, the affirmative or the negative could read other critical literature from another critical author that interacts with the affirmative, and then we can learn from that interaction, because only when the affirmative is a K can we have KVK debates in which we interact with unique forms of literature. Because usually when the app is a liberal policy, then we only have a K versus policy debate, K versus Phil, K versus whatever. But only under this model is it possible to have interactions between Ks, which is something that is educational.
Okay, is everyone good? Spencer, you good?
Yeah.
Fairness always, the ballot cannot shape personal beliefs or behavior, but it can remedy in-round abuse from an unfair affirmative reading of what I see losing stalls. Our interpretation does not force them to read a plan, deny method debates, or even regulate the app's content. Debates' competitive nature entails that the negative should not be unfairly punished for being unprepared to debate unpredictable advocacies. That is the best of both worlds. It encapsulates every single benefit of their model and it solves fairness. Fairness outweighs one, its intrinsic. Competition is a common denominator. They frame the debate around concessions, game the prep sheet, and selectively highlight and spread evidence which proves that they want to win. Any defense to fairness is paradoxical. It relies on fairness to be evaluated, so you should drop your pen and hack against Spencer if he wants to win. Two, it's burnout. It's because scientific studies correlate fairness with openness and humility, but unfairness with cynicism and burnout. It turns accessibility and the framework dissets. Their model empirically causes physical exhaustion, which makes it impossible to solve their impacts and kicks people out of debate. Fairness turns education one is testing. We learn best when we are a thorough back and forth discussion about a specific topic. Your one-sided discussion leads to possibility for knowledge about the human movement in the first place. Two, is participation. There's no incentive to learn in an unfair game in the first place. If we're faced with procedurally unfair rounds, teams will just quit, which means it obviates any benefit to their movement because people will not learn anything about their literature, which is their internal now the line. First, they don't meet topical apps must use the state to defend rewilding tracts of land, which they do not do. Prefer for precision. Only we have read definitions that clarify words in the topic. State legislators and district courts conclude that resolved require stating policies in the U.S. means the federal government. Plain meaning also proves that topical apps must return species to their habitats and land, which this was not contested in the winter, so it so you should assume that they do not mean based on precision. Now, their counter term, it links to our offense. One is limits and ground, allowing the app to defend anything like truisms like racist and bad, or to defend truisms like racist and bad, or world peace acts. All beats are removed from the negative and deletes every core negative disad, infrastructure, hedge, food prices, and chords, which forces us to go for recycled generics and destroy the negative research burden. And their current counter term is also unlimited to allow for any possible apps, any possible app which allows for truisms. Now the models argue. They say the neg wins before the one sees red. They have no impact to this. If we're winning one tweet is innately competitive, and our fairness arguments improves, it is impossible to engage with the lineage of NAS, which is worse for their movements. We are winning that discussions are better because debaters are less prone to antagonizing others and are more open to actually listening about their movement in the first place. Because when we are forced to negate apps that defend truisms in the first place, because we have the burden of rejoinder, because we have to prove an opportunity cost, which means that their method is bad, which is worse for their model. Now the competition is that it's wrong. First, it's pathologizing. Black traders regularly defend claims with USMP action, rely on technical arguments, and read framework versus playlist apps claiming otherwise leads to authenticity testing, which shows psychic violence to debaters and perpetuates harmful stereotypes. In Trent's case, 2, topicality is a negotiation and not an imposition. The app has an equal chance to defend their model. 3, debate is voluntary, claiming it results in physical harm. Turbulence is real violence. Now, debates are wrong. The reason why some KVK debates are good now is because there's incentive for K team to tie their app closer to the resolution, so they won't lose to T. Under their vision of the topic, the negative can no longer defend RT violation, which deletes the incentive to even be somewhat topical, which is bad. 2, let us improve it. Topicality produces better critical debates. Arguments on the neg are tailored and contextualized. But beyond decide 1 is the inherency trick. Beyond decreases faith in the state. We spend 2 months debating the benefits of the topic, knowing that the government won't pass it. 2, they link matching their advocacy and solving their impact fields in alternative world. Now the grammar decide legal definitions are good. 1 is predictability. It proves it's more accessible to the public. No novice or under-resourced debater would anticipate theirs. It can be gay kept in academic journal. 2, it's a floor not ceiling. The plain meaning of the resolution is a floor for topical ground, not a final consensus. The racism is that it doesn't weigh judge choice, self-materiality, technically litigating causes false positives through concessions, because the balance only single technicality teams disingenuously attempt to justify racism to win and seeking their own selves. The racism paradox, you shouldn't expect judges to be anti-racist because the ballot does not reflect truth. Voting on a racist argument is not racist, but voting on an unfair argument is unfair. Glukowski answers cross-rely the answers from compartment even if it influences procedural fairness, the ballot cannot resolve the history of topicality, and the internal link is smaller. And fairness kills participation because it's infinitely unpredictable. No one has ever quit debate because of fiat. At worst, saying it's unfair, zeros of competition is that because they accuse us of being unfair in the first place. It's also impossible to separate both the structural unfairness. Excuse the debate at the level of procedural fairness because judges cannot evaluate the debate fairly. If one team picks their own topic and we're controlled into generics, enforcement does that classify the answers from competition above. SSD preparedness is wrong against case. We defend our app. We don't answer the case. 50% racist is wrong. Cross by inherency trick from above. They have to win. Why the topic is bad in the first place for them to win this argument. The judge choice argument, they say saving ourselves. It's not a word. The judge should actively intervene because technical litigation is bad because it means that debaters are labeled as racist as a drop argument because the ballot is only a referendum on truth. Now the case. Vote neg on presumption. Other rounds them. Even if we abstractly change our minds, the ballot does not ostracize them. And other forms like book hubs ensure that they can spread their literature in other places. But our interpretation also solves their offense because they can read any app that criticizes the resolution. We should not just. The only difference is that we do not need to be able to negate it because they can defend anything like truisms, which invites more antagonization. The impact is psychological violence. Attaching hubs to the ballot causes burnout when judges screw them or vote them and drop them down on dropped arguments. They say winning rounds has unique value. If there's no reason why the ballot is key to spread their literature, etc., then it means that they cannot win this argument because that was the entire expectation of solvency for the app. They say being racist is a voting issue because it scares teams away. It doesn't scare teams away because our model solves for that. There's no reason it solves for that. It's also better for their model because inviting discussions and empathy, etc., and listening instead of being forced to prove an opportunity cost to their app is better. They say choosing not to double down solves our arguments. No, because burden over joint, we have to negate truisms like racism bad. That was above the golden rule. It's crossed by singly, which is bad because the bad is only a referendum on truth, on technicality, relying on judges to validate debaters' feelings. It's parasitic and violent because they view it as problematic.
Okay. Again, any questions or thoughts about the tunar? Alright, so which impact did the tunar go for? That was in the 1C.
Fairness?
Yes, fairness. What? Yeah, what were the two warrants for fairness the 2NR extended?
The Glauchowski evidence.
That was later. Well, yes, so that was an argument. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But what were the first two arguments at the top of the 2NR?
Paradox.
Yeah.
The paradox.
Said negotiation, we don't force them.
Yeah. So that was an argument on the that was later on in the disads. I'm talking about at the very top of the 2NR when they say one, that competition is the common denominator. They say that fairness is intrinsic to the activity, so it is the most important. Does anyone have any explanation for this argument? Can anyone explain this?
Is that instantivism?
What?
Like it's instantive to the activity themselves?
Yeah, kind of. So the argument is that everyone in debate follows competitive incentives. We do things like prep judges, show up to rounds, prep before rounds, because everybody wants to win the round. The second argument, this is, no, ready? This is the card. What card is it?
I don't know how to pronounce it.
Golodowski.
Yeah, Topicality. What did it say?
It said that like fairness, or I guess like the lack of fairness is bad because it creates psychological violence or things like exhaustion and like other impacts that are like bad for the health of debaters.
Yeah, exactly. Is there anywhere in the 2NR where the 2NR talks about why psychological violence within debate, is there anywhere in the 2NR that might be like kind of contradictory, do you think, with this idea about psychological violence within debate? Anywhere where it talks about the 1AC's references to psychological violence? So the 2NR also makes an argument, I think, am I correct in this, that the app kind of trivializes violence by comparing the in-word kind of, or in-debate kind of racism or whatever to out-of-world violence kind of is itself problematic because it is comparing two different things. This could be something that the 2AR could point out and say is something that the 2NR also does by talking about how fairness causes psychological violence and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Or if what I said was a mischaracterization?
Oh wait, sorry. What did you say?
So I said, because the 2NR said that their fairness impacts rely on psychological violence, but then the response to the 1AC or the 1AR's arguments about racism causing psychological violence is that you said the 1AR like equates in-round kind of issues of like race with like real world violence, and that's bad. But the 2NR also relies on those arguments to say why fairness causes psychological.
Oh wait, that's like a separate argument. So there are two arguments that the 2NR goes around fairness. First is like it's innate to competition, and so like the ballot can only solve for give us our access to the ballot back. And then the second one is like there's the internal argument. So like just in case if you think that accessibility matters, like we straighten it.
Okay, yeah. So there's layers to that argument. Also, yeah, definitely very good. Does anyone have any ideas what the 2AR might go for, or what kind of disads might have been undercovered or is particularly strong? Justin?
The tab room rule one.
The tab room rule one? Okay, you want to explain it?
Yeah, I think it's like the judge is constitutively an educator on tab room, which means that they have an obligation to reject racism.
Okay, yeah. Did you flow a response in the 2NR or no?
I just heard like group the ballot solvency arguments or something. Or like I didn't hear something specific on constitutivism.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so there were two arguments on why racism outweighs. It just says that one of them is that the judge choice resolves materiality because technical litigating causes false positives. Do you guys catch on in your flow? It was something that was in the 1NC and also in the 2NR. Does anyone have any idea what that might mean? You're nodding over there.
We also talked about it in the lecture.
Yeah, it was also part of the lecture.
But could you repeat the argument?
The technical litigating causes false positives yes.
Like even if your opponent wasn't actually racist, if you went on the flow that they were, it would be written. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
I think there were two warrants. Like the first is like speeches. Like speeches are like different times, and for example, if in the very last speech one team makes an argument as to why the other is racist and they don't get to respond to that, that would be really bad. there could other be like the other circumstances, such as if it's in the 1AR, then the 2AR hits the front line and it's impossible to respond to. And then the other one is, I think it's like the better debater would be able to win that the other is racist. So it's not about essentially which argument is true, but whoever's able to debate it better, which means that the better debater can prove that the worst debater is racist, even if they're not.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Spencer, are you ready?
Yeah.
Do you want to release the beast?
No, we're not.
Guys, I think we need to hype Spencer up.
Yeah, I think we need to hype Spencer up.
No.
So,
I'm good.
everyone help Ava and I. We're gonna go rah rah, release the beast. All right.
Rah.
Ready, Chupong?
Chupong. 3,
2, 1.
Rah, rah, release the beast.
Rah rah.
I think Swickle's gonna give such a fire to right now.
Okay, is everyone ready? Okay, it'll just be the case page and then T. Is everyone good? Victim blaming is racist. The 1AR flagged this as a voting issue and it was dropped. The threat alone of doubling down, quote, makes debate inaccessible because it blackmails us into accepting racism because calling it out creates a, quote, fear of retribution in future rounds. They just had a claim, a warrant that makes an argument. It was uncontested and you know it's true, which means that we get full access to the scope of our racism often. So all we need to win is that it outweighs. Their only response is that their model invites empathy when there's a burden of rejoinder. But that isn't our argument. Our argument is that when they blackmail you in the 1NC and the 2NR by saying, hey, I promise you I'll be more racist when you read KAFs and I go against them and double down when they know they can choose not to. That is our argument about why it's racist. You have to explain in a decision why that would cause more empathy. That just doesn't make any sense. The rest of the dissents are irrelevant and the rest of the debate is irrelevant. None of the responses were delineated as independent offense and you don't get to win for being only 90% anti-racist. Any dissents, your performance is sufficient for you to lose. So, and the 2NR didn't do any framing that indicted anything else otherwise. The impacts proper group all of their fairness terminals, education, intrinsicness, and testing all flow out because we've internally turned fairness itself. Racism is the most unfair because it guts access. They've conceded that it creates, quote, the ultimate unfair skew by making engagement literally impossible, and that is also a logical prerequisite. The benefits of a fairer model are mooted if no one shows up, which is terminal offense and defense, since fairness has zero intrinsic value in a game where no one can play. The rest of the limelight is irrelevant because our impact hijacks every reason why fairness matters, while also being externally bad. A racist model is both inaccessible and racist, but an unfair model is only at worst inaccessible because our impacts cause theirs, but not vice versa. Only we have a risk of unique offense. I'll answer the Glukowski evidence here. We control it strong internally to burnout because physical exhaustion is more tiring than procedural exhaustion. Remember, racism is literally felt, but fairness is intangible, which is the materiality argument. Their only response is that the ballot can't resolve the history of T, but that isn't our argument. Our impact is exhaustion from the independent voters, so it doesn't matter if you can't resolve the history of T. It's about their specific argument about forcing us to double down, or forcing themselves to double down now. Tau doesn't solve. You drop agency. Debates should confront their aggressors on their own terms. There's no external agency to stake the round to in the real world, so having our voices heard is necessary to turn solitary coping into interpersonal dialogue, and I'll extend reverse tab solves. If they were so uncomfortable that they felt that the round needed to be staked on, then they should also stake the round on their own comfort, which is dropped. Their only response is that it's not their burden, but they don't explain why they can't stake the round on their own comfort or their fear of a false positive, which means that it also applies to them. Balance solvencies across group. All of their answers, they were never flagged as an explicit response to the golden rule, so you can't do a cross application for them in the RFP. Even if you could, none of them apply. We've never said that the ballot needs to turn back time, undo history, or that we physically dependent on it. Just that impact turned the mandate of balance solvency. The idea that a judge must produce change in order to act against racism is ethical blackmail. It creates an exhausting environment for minority debaters where problematic rhetoric is a no-cost option. If the adults in the room feel powerless to do anything about it, they've conceded that voting affirmative reverse causally solves this because the same logic as to why the ballot solves their fairness impact. Voting up the 1AC's performance sends a signal that there's no recourse for racism in debate, or refusing to hold the 1AC accountable and unconditionally refusing racist practices never sends a signal in the first place, which solves. Also, they say that being sad, they say that we won't be sad about our losses, but that's inevitable because we're upset about unfair decisions too. Impact Calc at the top makes this really simple. They have said that voting app, if you can't solve, is unfair, or if it's unfair, we have said needing to solve causes exhaustion. So if the 2NR is right that consequences matter, then the best option is to consequentially vote against racism.
Before you guys start making your decision, which you should DM to Montrez and I, just say Ava or Spencer. Do you guys have any questions about the 2AR? Should we talk about the 2AR before they vote?
No, I think they should vote and then.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. So, try to write like a sentence or two and to explain your vote, but yeah.
Wait, Harris, who did we send it to?
Montrose and I, make your chat. Well,
Yeah, I inserted like maybe.
what?
What should I say? And then just like wrote it out. So I said over to it. Well, no. I said everything that wasn't bold. I said this.
I think the impact.
I was also supposed to say I thought the impact was smart. Blackmailing is a good way to phrase it. I think it's better than yeah. We wish before it's like it's a self yeah, but making it offense. Oh, of course, yeah. So the whole thing was like I didn't want to use any of the app because I knew that stuff. Yeah. Now generate as much offense.
That's smart.
Seven subdivisions without one. How damage so nice.
That's what the answer is about to do.
That's crazy. We can't see those.
Yes. So you're laundry? Yeah, I just wait like a little bit.
I guess like to compare like what they would look like. Okay, I don't know if I said the
Oh, it's
example,
here.
Process the smart thing. Honestly, yeah, I thought about it. I did that at the beginning of the summer, and then I was like, I actually don't know what you're supposed to say. Oh, you're just supposed to say that.
Bro, I just started playing.
This half was unbreakable, but you have to say it first. You can't accidentally say models first.
Wait, should we stop the recording?
Once you said models first,
Harris,
Yeah.
should we cut the recording?
Oh, sure, yeah.